Hi, this is Kate Elliott, and this is season 4 of Narrative Worlds, in which I and a fantastic guest talk about some aspect of writing, craft, publishing, life, career, or what have you. And today I'm incredibly delighted to have Nalo Hopkinson with me. Nalo is a SFWA Grandmaster. I love that. And I'm just going to list a bunch of stuff here. Sorry. The Octavia Butler Memorial Award, the Inkpot Award, you've been nominated for on shortlists of, and in some cases won, the British Fantasy Award, World Fantasy Award, Norton Award, Sunburst, Prix Aurora, excuse me, I wrote really small here, Campbell, I can't pronounce that, Mythopoeic, anyway, Nebula, Hurston Wright Legacy, Hugo, New York Times Notable Book of the Year, which is very fancy, John W. Campbell Award winner, James R. Tiptree, Philip K. Dick. You are also an artist, a maker of three-dimensional objects, and a professor of creative writing. So and we've known each other for maybe 20 years or more.
Maybe more, yeah.
More. Yeah,
The years start to pile up after a while, and you're like, I own all these years. How did that happen?
And then they compress, right? Like things do under the weight.
Yes.
Which brings us to our topic. And I'm just so excited that we could talk about this, because I think this is something that really matters, both for us personally, but also in the greater world and the way we think about creativity, art, writing, and which is creativity as a lifelong journey. And I want to start by saying that I think it wasn't last year. It was a couple, because the years don't make any more sense now after the pandemic, well, we're not even post-pandemic, but in a couple of years ago, in the period of young adult debuts, were these huge splashy debuts. And I saw someone say, probably on then Twitter, if I don't publish by 25, is it too late to have a career? And it struck me so much there's so many levels to that statement. But what it struck me is this inability to see, and it's usually women who say this, right? Or perhaps non-binary, to see themselves as someone old. Like they cease existing. There's a point past which you cease existing. So if you don't do it now, then you're gone. Where do you think this comes from?
The whole cult of youth, where writers will get introduced as how young they are, and I should say I'm 63 years old, and so I guess people internalize the value that if you haven't done it by the time you're 18. I mean, Mary Shelley published Frankenstein when she was 19. That somehow it's all over, and it breaks my heart to hear it, because it is so untrue. I didn't publish my first novel till I was 38. I remember once another writer who was hosting an event trying to introduce me as a young writer, because to her I was, but I stood up in the middle of the introduction and said, I'm 40 years old. Don't be trying to fool them with, young writer. I mean, I hope to be around another another few decades, but this idea that it's all over. I mean, I look at many of my students now, many of whom are in their 20s, and they're still grasping nuance. They're still grasping subtext. Some of that your brain isn't able to grasp until you're approaching 30. I know I wasn't ready to write a novel in my 20s. You don't have to be.
That's what you just said there, you don't have to be. It's like this idea that you have to do everything right now. But you don't have to do everything right now. There's part of it part of it I tend to blame on the capitalist enterprise and the way that art is commodified. So it has to be sellable, it has to be marketable. And that creates some kind of constraints around how people are going to approach it and how people are going to approach the idea of who I am and what is my brand. I mean, the fact that we have to, that we're urged to talk about ourselves as brands, you know, what's your brand as a writer? Well, I don't know, writing,
Yeah.
you know, but that's so last century.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you approach it that way, then ideas of I have time. I have time to go through all these things and to go on this journey. Whereas
Yeah.
it's like a right now. What are we doing right now, as opposed to what am I doing now, and how is that going to play into what comes next, and then what happens after that?
Mm-hmm. And
It,
nobody's going to care when, you know, I have wrinkles and gray hair. And it's just not so. I've since I moved to Vancouver, Canada, about 3 years ago. I've had to take taxis a few times, and 4 times in the past 2 years, I'm talking to the taxi driver, and they said, "So what do you do?" And I say, "I'm a writer." "Oh, like a journalist?" "No, I write novels." "Oh, does anybody read books anymore?" 4 times in 2 years.
wow,
Yeah.
wow.
So I see that why people feel an urgency. But when I start breaking it down to them, I say, "Okay, so I write stories. Stories are never going to go away." And they say, "Oh, well, I don't know." I say, "Well, how many songs have you listened to today? How many movies have you seen in the past? You know, those are all stories. Somebody's got to write them.
Yeah.
And they don't just spring fully formed. People learn how to write one way or the other. They learn. So when you think of it in terms of what we actually do, not what gets held up as here's the perfection, um, you can have a career with much more longevity than we're told.
A few years ago, I saw an announcement about a pop-up shop for so there's a local artist, sculptor and painter named Satoru Abe, who's he's quite well known here. And I think he's actually fairly well known. I believe he's well known in the art world. So he is now in his 90s, and they did a pop-up shop that had a lot of his work from his decades and decades of work. And it was much of which was on for sale, which, like, if I could have afforded there was one piece in particular, but you know, it was out of my range. Anyway, I made my son come with me because for a couple of hours each day, he was there himself. He's like 95, right? And he would give little art lessons. So I made my son come. And meanwhile, his elder sibling, who would have like been over the moon to meet this man, was like, "I can't believe they're texting. I can't believe that you get to do this, getting sit down with this guy, you know, you don't even care." But he did, my son gamely did it, you know, and it was really interesting. But this pop-up shop was accompanied by a newspaper article, an interview with him, in which he said, "I am more creative now than I have ever been. I am doing more work, doing things that interest me." And the thing that strikes me most is that we write different things or create different art at different times in our life that we couldn't have done. So there's a book, I look at a book I wrote when I was 30. I can't write that now for
Yeah,
so many reasons, right?
yeah, yeah,
And I don't mean that to denigrate that book. I mean
yeah,
that because I can't do that now. For the society has changed, I've changed. But there's things that I write now that I couldn't have written then.
yeah, yeah. And well, I am actually at a phase where not only is writing hard, reading is hard. So I'm doing way less of it, of both than I used to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but does feel like a phase. I feel like hiding somewhere back there, you know, perhaps once I'm no longer also being a full-time professor,
Mm. Yeah.
um, that energy will come back. So I've been around long enough to not sweat it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and to have enough under my belt projects that I'm still working on, that I am still producing. Like I have, books in the pipeline. I have short stories that are being copy edited, that kind of thing. Um, but beginning to realize that this stuff goes in, you find in sort of waves of, this is what I'm doing now. Now I'm concentrating on, I don't know, keeping a roof over my head, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This idea that you have to always be writing every day, you have to sit down and works for some people. It has never worked for me.
But also people who don't have that experience, right? For them, if they can't work for 6 months or they don't feel the urge to write for a year because they're, working full time or they have health problems or something else is going on, whatever. If you see it from that early side, it's a catastrophe. If you see it across the stretch of saying, I have hopefully, we don't all, but hopefully have a lifetime to be creative, you see it as exactly that, that ebb and
Yeah,
flow. It's going to come and
yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah. And it sort of pushes me to try new things too. So when it first began difficult to read just prose, and I didn't realize at the point I was so anemic that I couldn't concentrate on anything.
Oh,
Couldn't
gee.
read a
Yeah.
sentence, much less write one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I returned to comics and graphic novels. That's a different
Hmm.
type of narrative. And it was easier for me to read those. And now those are difficult to read. Um, I'm doing audiobooks because that's reading. No matter what anyone tells you, it's reading. Um, and having to do reading for being a professor also keeps my hand in, because then I'm talking to students about craft. So I'm trying not to sweat it and realizing that the creativity doesn't go away. I can cook the bejesus out of a pumpkin soup.
And that is creativity. We sometimes we have such limited ideas. These,
Mhm.
well, I think of them as these, can we market it? Then it's creative, right? But in fact, creativity is trying on clothes is creative. If you go to the store and try on clothes, you think, where would I wear this? That's a form of creativity. Oh, I'm going to go to this party. I'm going to a wedding next month. Would this be the right thing? That's a
Yep.
creative act.
Yes. I
So,
remember when I first started going to academic conferences, um, and hearing often from people who were scholars that they weren't creative, that what I did was creative.
yeah,
You realize I'm reading what you write in order to figure out what I'm doing.
yeah.
And the ways that you synthesize ideas and you synthesize schools of thought and come up with something else entirely is pure creativity. And it astounds me every time when I find the scholarly work that I connect to.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do it without thinking half the time. I was telling a story yesterday of being somewhere in Ontario going to a lakeside that had a little beach. And there was a little boy kneeling in the sand, and he had a shovel and a Superman doll and a Batman doll. He was about 7. And he was making up a song about what they were doing, just off the cuff, just making
Yeah.
it up. He was free flowing. And I watched this
Yeah.
kid go for just minutes and minutes, just completely unselfconsciously, essentially writing a song. And we get this thing that tells us that somehow it's got to come out perfect, or it doesn't have any value, or it's not really creative, or it's too easy, therefore it can't be, art. I think I spent a lot of time trying to dispel some of those ideas in students, because it it takes them away from themselves in ways that should be criminal.
It, I mean, to me, creativity is one of the core elements of being human.
Yeah,
And I think that everyone is creative. Every person is creative. And what happens is that that's taken away. Sometimes it's taken away from them. But I don't think anyone is ever born without it,
yeah,
without the urge to be. And as you say, that narrowness. And I think that narrowness of saying what is creative? Well, creativity is writing a book that you can sell and get a good advance for and get you, a review somewhere and you see it in the bookstore. And it's true that if you want to have a career as a writer, in and of itself, there's things you have to do to make that happen, to pay your rent and eat food, right? But that's like, I don't know how to say it. That's like that's not it. That's
No.
part of it. That's a mechanism part of it, but the creative part of it is I had quite a bad publishing experience a couple of years ago, and it's for the first time, and I've been writing a long time, and we've both been writing a long time, many decades. And it was really the first time that wasn't related to, like, having preemie twins or something like that, where well, actually, I wrote when I had preemie twins. I don't know what I was thinking. I had a deadline and I was young, so I had the energy somehow to do it. But it was the first time that the whole thing was so debilitating emotionally and psychologically that I didn't write for 2 months. And I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I'm done. And I was supposed to be working on something under contract. And I was so hammered by it that every time I couldn't even open the file because I would flinch. I would have that flinch reflex. And I'm always poking at other things. Like you said, there's always other stuff going on, right? Little back burner things. And one of them kind of said, hey. And I said, you know what? I finally forgave myself and said, I'm going to show some kindness to me, and I'm going to take what wasn't really a risk, but it felt like a risk because the contract sits there like a big hammer about to hit you, right? You have to do this. You're obliged. And I said, I'm just going to work on this thing. So I started, it already had like maybe 5,000 or 10,000 words. I started working on it, and it was like this gate opened, and I wrote 240,000 words in 6 months. I wrote an entire thing because I let go.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I could have done that in my early career. I don't know that I could have given myself permission to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I might have stopped writing if that had happened to me earlier. But because I had the experience and actually just the age of I'm 65 to being over 60, to just say, fuck it, right?
Yeah.
Fuck the rules.
Yeah.
The rules are not there for us.
No, they really aren't.
They're never there to benefit us, right? I was able to, and I thought, the experience was, I said, I love to write. I still love to write. And that's one of the things that when you see this as something that happens over the decades of your life, your whole life, that if you can keep coming back and reconnecting to that place in you, what makes you want to write in the first place or do whatever art you're doing? Where is that place, that wellspring? That's what it's easy for me anyway to get driven off the path into some other place that I think the 5-lane highway paved with, screaming cars at 80 miles an hour, right? But I got to get back to that quiet place because that's where it comes from.
Yeah. Yes, and the motivation changes through your course of your life. I mean, there's 2 things I'm thinking of, 3 actually, from what you said. And one is that people on the outside have this idea that the way you make a living as a writer is you write a book, you sell a book, you get money, you hopefully get royalties. That is only one way. And if I were to depend on that, I would starve. But it's all the other things, the getting invited to speak at a high school or speak at a conference. I've had people ask me to do consulting work for arts councils because they know I can put a sentence together and I can analyze information. I've had artists ask me to put together anthologies to accompany their exhibitions, and those are all sources of income. Plus, you resell stuff.
Yes, yeah.
So
and
I
there's
think
nothing better than saying, we just sold your audio rights to your backlist. And you're like,
yeah, exactly. I I don't have to do any more work. I did the
Okay.
work. And it's
They're
paying me
doing it.
twice. Yeah. Yes, selling audio rights, selling film rights, selling just reprint rights. And sometimes it's $10, sometimes $50, sometimes it's 5,000, but that mix is what adds up. It's not just this driven path. For some people that works. For Stephen King that works, but I bet he also gets all the other stuff, right?
He has all the other stuff too, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So there's that. And now I've completely lost it because at 63 your memory goes, so it'll come back.
Yeah, the
But
three things. No, I know. There were three things that I was,
yes,
yeah.
yes, it was following that impulse and finding your way back. And what gives you the impulse to be creative in a particular way changes. So when I first started writing fiction, it was because I didn't want the job I had. Okay. And because I'd always loved fiction, and my dad was a writer and my mother worked in libraries, and I was always thinking about how do you put these things together. But now I kind of like the job I have. I'm not trying to get away from my life anymore. It's not an escapist impulse to doing the writing. So I have to find the other reasons to write. You have to give yourself permission to be a living, changing being. And I know that I'm able to have that luxury because I have an established career and I have a job with an established income. I did not start out that way. And some of those years when we were homeless and I was losing teeth, were pretty dire. So I know it sounds facile to say, well, just follow your nose. I'm not saying exactly that, because yeah, you got to do what you got to do to put, food on the table. But also try to make a little bit of elbow room for yourself to do that thing that nourishes you. Even if you can't do it right then, don't put it away. Know that you might be able to find a place where you can do it again. Don't sort of try to trample it down because it's not working. Yeah, I'm sounding, inexorably sunny coming from this vantage point, but
But you know what? We have to, because sometimes people get trapped in that idea that if you can't write this thing, if you can't write every day and produce a lot and sell everything you write, that somehow you're a failure, but you're not a failure. I had a long discussion with Susan Dennard about this topic on narrative worlds. What does failure mean? And when you think that to me is one of the values of thinking about creativity as a lifelong journey, was that instead of thinking, because then you see what do I want to be doing at 80? If I reach 80, do I still want to be creating something? And that changes the perspective, I think.
yeah.
Because it also changes the actually, I also think, remember LiveJournal? That was a while ago.
Yeah.
When we were all on LiveJournal, but oh my gosh, I remember one time a young writer who I think was frustrated because they couldn't sell something, or they had sold something and couldn't sell something else. And they said, those old writers need to get out of the way and let us have our turn.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
was really struck by the suggestion that there was there was like, slots, right? Here's that. So if they got out of the way, then these new writers could have their slots, right? But there's an embedded idea in there that what people do after their certain age isn't worthwhile.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
oh my gosh, at the Smithsonian, I think there was an exhibit about, I think it was Hokusai, the famous Japanese ukiyo-e artist. It was just a room of things he had done after he turned 80. And it would, and then they would have some comparison with some of his early work. And it was phenomenal. Just he had just reached that age that I think women, that point that women, we joke that women do when we hit menopause, which is like the fuck it age, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it was so inspirational, first of all, but it was also amazing because I thought, wow, he's 90. He's 85. He's 90. Or Miyazaki. Did you see The Boy and the Heron?
No,
Hayao Miyazaki's new
yeah,
film.
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And he's what, 80? He's whatever in his 80s, right? And
Heaven knows.
Yeah, but art means you have things to say your whole life.
Yeah.
There
And
isn't time to
also,
put you out to pasture. You're done now.
yeah,
The things you
yeah.
say might, anyway.
And there's not a quota. It comes from a scarcity model that says there's only so many room for so many writers. There's only
Yeah,
room for so many
yeah,
Miyazakis. There's only, and I have seen people use that as a way to browbeat themselves into not writing. Oh, the world already has so many great writers, they don't need me. It's like, well, maybe they do, because you might be the perfect writer for this bunch of thousand people over here. You don't know. Uh, I don't think publishing in general is ever going to say, oh, we have too many books, right?
yeah,
It's not like we have to get out of the way. But if what you find you want to do is to stop doing whatever it was you were, if you're thinking this type of creativity no longer works for me, that's also a valid choice. That's also something you don't need to beat yourself up about. Just because the world might always expect you to be this type of person who produces this type of thing doesn't mean you have to. And when I started to figure that out was when every so often you wonder what happened to such and such a musician that you used to follow,
yeah, yeah.
and you haven't heard anything from them in years, and you look them up and they're doing just fine, thank you very much. They have moved into producing, or they're making movies, or they're sitting at home with their grandkids and helping them build sandcastles. Whatever it is, they're doing just fine. But I realized if you have a stretch of a life that you can actually change horses midstream, you can. And those, I had the opposite experience of the one you're talking about, where I was in Finland for a convention there. I was in Turku, Finland, and that apparently is where Tom of Finland is from. The artist who became famous for doing all these sort of BDSM art that would have like sexy sailors picking each other up on the dock kind of thing. Um, Came from a small town in Finland, and the local museum was having a retrospective of his work. So, I mean, that's how I knew I wasn't in North America anymore.
Well, you were in Scandinavia, I guarantee. Yeah, yeah.
Sunday afternoon exhibition, and people taking their kids to see all these like barely leather clad penises, right? Some of them not clad at all. But they also had some of his work he'd done as a child, like the kind of thing he'd take home to his mom and she'd put up on the fridge door. So you had this range of work that you got to see how his aesthetic changed, but also how at one point he was a 6-year-old who drew like stick figures. He didn't sort of leap
Yeah,
fully formed.
yeah. Yeah, because that's the other thing. If you think that, and this is like a personal thing. When I think about my debut novel, I think, well, first of all, my debut novel was really like the fifth or sixth book I wrote. But I don't look at that and say that was the high point of my career. I look at that and
Mm,
say that was the first stone, right? The first
yeah.
stepping stone. That was, I would hate to be in a situation where I had to see my first couple of works as like the big thing.
Mm,
That everything was either kind of downhill from there or plateaued from there, as
yeah.
opposed to something that you're starting from and that you're evolving from and changing from and using.
Yeah.
I can look at my work and I can see that it's all me, but
Yes.
I can also see the ways that I've hopefully improved, the things that
Yeah.
the ways my thinking has changed,
Yeah.
craft stuff that I've worked on or
Yeah.
adapted.
Yeah. Here's the thing though, does the market agree with you that you've gotten better?
Well, that's an
The-
interesting point, isn't it? Because I still think I don't think, I know my best-selling series is still the Crown of Stars, which is the 7-book epic fantasy set in a setting heavily borrowed from early medieval, well, not heavily borrowed, completely borrowed from early medieval Europe, which was published from 1997 to 2005 or 6,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
there is something to be said for, in the US in particular, you know, with this cultural gestalt, right? So did I match the cultural gestalt best at that point? I don't know. Maybe I did. Maybe I don't match the cultural gestalt as much now as I did then, because I've, you know, because we have this longer period that we're pulling from. I don't know. What do you think about that idea that there's a gestalt that I mean, like, I'm not on TikTok. I can't, because not because I object to TikTok, but because I have zero interest. My brain doesn't do, you know, those short 30-second things. I can't.
Yeah. Well, same thing. I know that my most popular book was my very first one published. But there are so many measures. So I try to read that book now and I just want to fix it.
Yeah, I've never read, I can't reread my first published novel. I'm just
I
like,
will no longer give readings from it. I can't. I see the energy, I see the imagination, I see the things that were my obsessions and still my obsessions, but I want to fix the sentences. And I want to fix some of the assumptions. And so there are people who agree with me, who say, well, no, this fifth book that you've done had these strengths that the first one didn't. I can see myself growing. Other people can see my work growing. The market doesn't necessarily. And then you become known for that one title or that series. And so if anybody wants to say, produce some of my work, it's always that book they're asking about. It's like, yeah, that's already done. That film came out a few years ago. Have you read anything else by me? And I've only once had a director say yes. So you learn to develop, if you're going to survive, if your ego's going to survive, you have to learn to develop your own means of assessing what excellence is for you. Can't always be looking out to, and even if you are looking out, because we're writing for other people to read it. But even if you are doing that you have a bunch of different measures. That it's not just the how many sales are you making.
Yeah, we have to. This is the hardest lesson for me, was that I kept, if I have a tendency to want to measure myself against things I can't control, you know, and that's never going to work. And I still struggle with that, but I'm better at saying, did this novel that I just finished do what I wanted with it, given, you know, the skill set I have at this moment? Yes. Okay. How it does when it's put out in the market is based on things that I can't control. You know, so I can't say this succeeded because it sold X or it failed because it sold Y. I have to say, I wrote the best book I could and I'm satisfied with it. In 5 years, I'll see all the things that are wrong with it. But right now, it's what I could do. And I reached close, because it does. You're right. I'm thinking about Melinda Lowe. So her debut novel, Ash, which is a sapphic retelling of,
I've read it.
oh my gosh, this is so
I don't
embarrassing.
remember.
It's a huntsman. Anyway, I'm sorry, Melinda, if you're
Little Red Riding
so
Hood?
embarrassed. Maybe. So
Anyway,
embarrassed.
I've read it too,
that
so
was
I
for a
know the
long time.
novel.
Anyway, for a long time, that was her most popular book. She published more books, but that was the one that even did a 10th anniversary edition. She published other books. And I think for a while she might have thought, well, that's just going to be how it is, that debut novel. But then last night at the Telegraph Club won the National Book Award, right? So now there's this huge, so now something recent hit. So, but that again is it's not out of our control to write the best book we can about something that really deeply is meaningful to us and that we really want to say. But what happens beyond that, and I don't, but happens beyond that is we can't control that. So we can't measure ourselves by those market things.
No. Nathan is saying that it's based on Cinderella.
Thank you.
That Ash is based on Cinderella.
That's right. That's right. I can see the cover, because it's got the
Yeah,
girl curled up like a, yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And also measuring yourself against other writers is a sure way to just let all the little gremlins into your head, um, and just sort of stop yourself. I've tried to learn to look for the attitudes that are trying to encourage me to not be creative and to be suspicious of them, even if for a time I
yes.
believe them. Yeah.
Yes, yes. One of the things, one of the questions I have, I actually have like 4 pages of notes, which I haven't even looked at yet. But one of the at the back, because this reminds me of that, how do you nurture creativity over the long haul? And we've actually been talking about that, strategies to do it. But one of the things is find community. And one of the things about finding community is learn to distinguish between the people who are really actually tearing you down or negging you, even though they are claiming to be supportive, versus the people who are genuinely happy for you,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
happy for what you're doing and
Yeah.
that relationship. Because in a way, I mean, I think a lot about how art is relationship. Like our art is our relationship with ourselves. Our art is our relationship with our life, with other art, with the people we know and what's happening. So that's what community is to me, is that relationship that we all have as people,
Mhm. Yes.
with a few
Yes.
exceptions, but most of us, we subsist on that we have.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to. And it's one of the reasons I'm so happy I'm part of Spec Fit community, because it has this culture of being supportive. I mean, it has all kinds of other things that you can
It is,
shake
yeah.
your finger
It's like people.
at.
It's a mix, right? Yeah,
Yeah, yes.
the good, the
But
bad.
in there is this culture of being supportive.
Yeah.
Um, and it goes right across from fans through to creators. When my primary partner and I were homeless, sometimes it was people from fandom who took us in. Sometimes people we'd never met, but um, somebody else in the community had recommended us to them and said, they won't kick your cats, they'll do the dishes, that kind of thing. And in many ways, fandom helped keep us alive until we could get back on our feet.
Yeah.
Um, when they say to you that writing is a solitary pursuit, I mean, when
Mm.
I'm actually putting words down,
Yeah. Yeah.
not even then, because I had a similar I don't know if it's a similar bad experience, but I also had a bad experience with a novel that was under contract. I was unable to finish it. I didn't realize how anemic I was, that I literally could not think my way to the end of a sentence. And I was trying to finish this novel. And what I handed in was full of holes. I put placeholders in. And the publisher refused to accept it, and they got me for breach of contract, which meant uh, my agent helped me find a way to not have to repay the advance. Otherwise, we were homeless. There was no way I was going to be able to repay
Yeah.
anything. So I couldn't look at that novel for years either. And every time I could convince myself to, I'd read a bit of it and think, I still like this. I still think I'm doing something good here. But you have this baggage of this horrible experience. Many years later, I had a student who came to me as a postdoc. Um, and I was her mentor for 3 years. Uh, she graduated, she got herself a good teaching position, then COVID happened. And she herself is a writer, and she put together a group of academic women writers. And she would open up a Zoom um, uh, window every morning at 8 a.m. And anybody who wanted to join from this group would come on and we would write together. We weren't reading each other's work, we weren't workshopping. We'd gossip for a bit, we'd chat for a bit, and then we would just work. And
With
that was how I
that,
finished that novel.
which, and
Yeah,
is that which
that's
book?
Blackheart Man. Yeah, yeah.
So listen, I am reading The Ark right now, which I love, because well, for one thing, I love your prose. I like, oh my God, I love your prose. Um, just the rhythm and clarity of your prose to me is just phenomenal, but it's also like nurturing. It's like having the best meal.
Oh.
But I remember you reading an excerpt from this book, I don't know how long ago, but it stuck with me. It must have been, how long ago, 12, 15 years? Would it
20,
have been?
almost 20. It took me
Almost
15 years to finish it, and the publisher had some issues, and it was 3 years before it got to the state where it is now.
I even remember which section you read. I'm almost 100% positive that it's the section where you describe the soldier, well, the group of
Moments
soldiers
before the sun's
going into
bottom
the
touched the
do you
horizon.
say
Yes, yeah.
piche,
Yeah,
which is the tar or the asphalt, right?
yeah, the
Whatever.
pitch, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I got to that section, and I'm like, this is it. And I have wondered ever since that reading. But I don't want to ask people, right? I don't want to say, how's that book going I heard from, because we don't know what
We
is,
don't know.
you don't know. And I can't tell you how delighted I am that it's here in my hands now. And it's also a great example of how sometimes we just have to step back and say, you know what, all else being equal, time may heal this
Yes,
and bring us back to that place.
yes.
That this
And
isn't the
community
end of the
helped me get
project.
there. Yeah,
Yeah,
community
and
helped me get
community,
there. That's
and
it's
community.
just
Yeah.
so it wasn't a solitary process all the time. I mean, it's just me and the words, but beside me in virtual space were a bunch of other women also. It was them and their words. Um, so it yeah, the idea that things are gone, they don't, they aren't necessarily, and it was what kept me going was when I could bring myself to read anything from it. I liked it. I mean, how often do you feel that you like your own work?
It depends on the day and the hour.
Yeah, it
Sometimes the
does.
minute. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Whereas this one, whenever I read anything from it, I liked it. And that's what let me know I should keep working on it, no matter what the rest of the world thinks. Um, it was a project that was there in front of me and that I kept coming back to. Yeah, I that was the scene I would read from forever because it was the very first scene I wrote. I had no idea
Oh,
what I was
how
doing with the damn book.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah.
it doesn't happen right away in the book.
No, I had to
It
move
does.
it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's in the right, well, obviously it's in the right place now, but it's also really interesting to me because if instead of seeing art as like a series of objects, right? Like we go to a museum, which is a very objectified way of looking at these objects that many of which were I, many of which were created for, sometimes they were created for display, but sometimes they were created for a purpose, right? So,
Mhm.
so for example, I was fortunate, I went to Central Asia last September, and I bought two rugs, handmade. One is a shirdak, a handmade felt rug, and the other is a hand-woven wool rug. So the wool rug is from Uzbekistan, from a women's collective in this village out in the middle of nowhere. And the shirdak was from a women's collective, bought directly from a women's collective, not in the marketplace through a middleman, in a small town on the road, and in Kyrgyzstan, right? So we got to buy it from the people who had made them. But I showed them, every time I would show pictures of them, they would say, "Oh, you're going to hang them on the wall?" And I said, "No, I'm putting them on the floor because that's what they're made for.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
made to
That,
be, they're made to be rugs." And that to
yes.
me, like, is it, yes, they will eventually get worn down. And you know what? Don't we all? Right?
God knows, yes.
And that to me is the most beautiful thing. That's what I can, that's to me the best tribute I can give to the women who made these beautiful pieces that are both art and things that we use.
Function. Yeah, they're made to
know.
be able to protect your feet on the floor, or to
And that if
protect the
people
floor from
think
your
about
feet.
their art, right? If people think about their art as these are things we're using this book to get through this bad time. I've,
Mhm.
or I need to decompress, so I'm gonna go play there's people like, I'm gonna go play a mindless game for an hour,
Mm-hmm.
or listen to music or something. These are
the things
art.
that get us through. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to work at the Toronto Arts Council as a grants officer, and one of my portfolios was visual arts. So I would see people's projects, and then I would run the jury where fellow artists would decide who would get the money. And I remember seeing a description of a piece by, I think it was Nebula Kubota, who's a Toronto artist, where he was making the work out of raw clay, and he was talking about um, the fact that things end, things die. So he would make it out of raw clay, put it out in the elements, so that rain, wind, somebody running too fast would break them back down, and so they would become earth again. And at first, I was horrified,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I just got my imagination got caught by the idea that yes, things are impermanent. Things break down, things die. People forget about books. They forget about you as a writer. Um, those are things you cannot control. Talking about not sweating the stuff you can't control, and that maybe there is, to some extent, I mean, the ego artist part of me still fights it, but maybe there is a kind of a beauty to that things are impermanent, or that things are made to be used as what they're used as. Like your rugs, like when I make art, I'm usually doing it with materials at hand, and my mother taught me the domestic
Hmm.
arts. So I have
Hmm.
fabric, I have a sewing machine. So I'll be making sculptures that are made out of fabric and stitched together. Um, and it's not sort of expensive materials, the specialized materials. I do use those if I come to it, but I really love the things that people create with their hands, using those to make other things with my hands. Um, I love using found objects. The more rusty, the better. I don't need to polish them back up to a shine, because what's beautiful to me is that they saw use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but
No, but it does make me think about this idea. We live in a world where a certain kind of personality wants to create these monuments in stone that will last forever, like the old Ozymandias poem by Percy Shelley
mm-hmm,
that we still know,
mm-hmm,
right? And
mm-hmm,
it's almost as if you can't create that monument in stone, then what use is it? But sometimes the use is just being, just living, having something that will touch people,
mm-hmm.
one person, 100 people, 100,000 people, whatever. But that all, I mean, because that is what our lives are, right? Well, I don't know. I'm
Moments. Yeah, I mean,
philosophically and in terms of physics, I don't understand time well enough to make any statement on that level. But as far as we know,
yeah,
if we've both had the experience, I'm sure, of having someone say to us, your life, your book saved my life, or
I
your
was
book
about to
gave
ask you. Yeah,
me, yes, your book gave me a haven when I needed one, or
yeah,
it got me through this terrible experience. And
yeah,
that is sometimes I hear something like that and I'll think, if that was the only thing, maybe that's why I wrote. Maybe that's why I'm writing. Maybe my
yeah,
entire career could be distilled down to, I saved this one person's life.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
would be enough, right?
It's
I
so
mean,
much, so much. I got a letter from somebody who had lost her home during Katrina and was now in another city, living in the attic of relatives. And one of the things she had saved was one of my books. And she told me that she kept rereading it, that it sort of gave her an anchor. And if I never do another thing,
yeah,
I've meant that much to a person. And it saves me in return every time.
yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's true, because remembering sometimes when I feel incredibly discouraged, and I do feel is discouraged at times and disheartened, sometimes I think, oh, but then I remember that letter I got, or that person who told me. And I think, and so there you have again the community, the reciprocity, the idea
Yes.
that art is reciprocity, because
Yeah.
we're getting back something too.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. And it gives you energy, yeah,
yeah,
to approach that page again. Just to know that something that you were probably cussing as you were trying to finish it meant so much to somebody. Um, yeah, I save those letters because when I'm discouraged too, I can go read them. And so often people are apologizing for disturbing my time. I'm like, no, you just gave me such a gift to
yeah,
tell me that something I wrote meant something to you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that aspect too, and again, I mean, I keep coming back in my own mind, and part of this is because I am getting older, right? And I am in that part of my career where I have to think more about what do I have time left for? Partly because, well, I mean, we never know how much time we have, right? But there's a difference between being 25 and 65 in terms of
Hmm.
what you might have. I mean,
Yeah.
unless some strange scientific development happens, but we can't count on that. But how important it is that I've had time and that you've had time to see our vision change over time, that nuance, that subtext, to bring all those things in, to say, I wouldn't write that story anymore, but I had to have written that story to reach the point where I could say I wouldn't have written that exact thing that way anymore.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and now I'm going to write something different, or I'm going to comment on something I wrote before in a different way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It just art is it's so amazing. It's so huge, if we let it be, if we don't
Yeah.
constrain ourselves with this idea that it is that debut at 25 that is going to get a big marketing budget, you know.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. Yeah. We need a more expansive way to look at what we do and to recognize that sometimes your next project won't be as strong as the one for it, but maybe you learned something doing it. Maybe you were
yeah,
trying something you hadn't done before.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
there's this sort of popular idea that any career that has achievements tacked to it, that the trajectory looks like this, but it doesn't. It looks more like,
yeah, that up and down,
it may go
yeah,
up, it may go down. The things that you put out in the world are a point on this graph that is not linear and will never be linear. Um, that you're allowed to learn from stuff you create. That you're allowed to take on a new learning curve. I was invited. Well, not invited. I had to pitch just like anybody else. But for a while, I was writing comics for DC in Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe. And I went from never having written a comic to all of a sudden writing for Sandman, so no pressure there.
wow, wow,
Which meant I had a learning curve. I had the learning curve from hell. I mean, I'm used to reading comics, but I'm not aware of being a visual reader. I would read, the words. Um, the first two issues I had to rewrite 8 times each before the publisher accepted them. And when I go back and look over, I wrote for 2 years for House of Whispers. When I go back and look at it, I see places where I hadn't learned something yet. Right? I could see the
mm,
places where
mm,
I'm
mm.
learning my craft still, and that will always be so. You'll always look back at previous work, but to give yourself permission to take on that learning curve and to put something out in the world. I mean, it has for me because I'm publishing conventionally. It has imprimatur. Somebody else has looked at it and said, "Okay, yeah, this is good enough." But that doesn't mean it doesn't have flaws.
Yeah,
But to let that be part of what we do, so that when someone says, "Well, you didn't do this very well here," you can say, "Yeah, I didn't, but I can do it now." Or I
I
can do parts of it.
for me, I think a lot of what I love about writing novels is that I'm probably never going to write I think it's very likely I'm never going to write a perfect novel. It's like, am I a slow learner, or is just there's just so much to learn, and that there is so much to learn is
Yeah.
part of the appeal.
Yeah.
You know, I have all
Yeah.
this time to like grapple with this, you know, or what
Yeah.
is it, Joseph Conrad's Wrestle with the Angel, right? You know, although I don't have a still silent presence bringing me meals and leaving them outside the door.
Mm.
Do you know that quote?
Yes.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
just
that
talking about Thoreau
yeah,
this
yeah,
morning, yeah, with
yeah.
bringing him
So,
meals.
but to me, it's like so endlessly interesting, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, that last book I wrote, I think I did pretty good, but there's still something I can do better,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
something I can try that I didn't try before. I mean, it just never, it never becomes stagnant if you don't let it.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know who it was who said a novel is a story with a flaw in it, but that
Oh,
statement is
I love
magical.
that.
Yes. Doesn't it just sort of encapsulate what we do? And
It's
I
like
remember
a life is a story with a flaw in it.
I remember asking Susie Mickey Charnas at some point, doesn't there a point come where you know how to write a novel? She said, no, no, you learn how to write the novel you're writing. And then you got
Yeah,
to do it again for the next novel.
yeah, and it'll be completely different.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think we're out of time. I
Oh,
feel
really?
good. I feel good. I feel heartened.
Yes, me too.
So
That's the
Vancouver,
other
huh?
part.
Yeah,
Vancouver.
anyway,
Yep.
we gotta find a way to get together.
Yes.
I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me. Um, I don't have anything else to say except for that I'm super excited. I'm like 2/3, 3/4 done with Blackheart Man, which yeah, that scene stuck with me all those years, and the fact that you were able to come back around and finish it, to me, is the best statement of why creativity is a lifelong journey, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. 18 years. And it's becoming a book now. It's almost ready to go out on the market.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
It's
Um, okay, so for those joining us on the SFWA YouTube channel, thank you for being here. And the April, is it March? Yes.
yes.
You understand.
I do.
April, I'll have Rika Aoki, who's the author of Light from Uncommon Stars. And May will be John Scalzi talking, and John and I are going to talk about social media.